I just want to welcome everyone. My name is Erin Smith, and I'm the workforce intern with the Eau Claire Chamber of Commerce. And just a reminder that this program is the property of the Eau Claire Area Chamber of Commerce. Any commercial or political use is prohibited without the express written permission of the chamber. The summit will be recorded, and all registered attendees will get access to the session recordings and resources. I'd like to turn it over to Scott Rogers now, the Director of Governmental Affairs here at the Chamber.
All right, thanks very much, Erin, and good morning, everyone. I hope some of you had a chance to participate in the other sessions that we've been having at the Workforce Summit. As you know, if you participated today or in the past, the overall goal of our Workforce Summit has been to provide employers with information and strategies they can use right away. However, it's also really hit home this year that policies and the actions of our federal and state governments can have a big impact. And so in this session, we're going to explore key issues that might be pending or ought to be acted on in the governmental level, and perhaps that would inform all of us in terms of trying to influence that as well. If you happen to listen to Ted Abernathy's opening keynote this morning, one thing that struck me is what he said of the Workforce Challenge, and he said, everybody's motivated, but everybody's frustrated. And it occurred to me that that also can certainly apply to policy and politics these days. So to explore the policy questions, we have what I consider to be a very savvy and knowledgeable panel with us today. You're going to be meeting them each individually, and we'll get into some specific issues, but I'm going to ask, sort of as a method of introduction, just so you know who's on as panelists, I'm going to ask each of them to kind of wave when I mention their name. So we have Allison Dembeck from the U.S. Chamber of Commerce. She just waved. We have Chris Reeder from Wisconsin Manufacturers and Commerce. We have Jim Wood from Competitive Wisconsin, and we have Representative Warren Petrick, who chairs the Assembly Workforce Committee in Madison. So we appreciate them being with us today. We are going to start with a short conversation with each of them, some of the specific policy items that they see are under consideration or ought to be at our state and federal levels of government. We will then have some question and answer and discussion. And as Erin mentioned, please enter your questions in the chat as we go. We'll try to monitor those and ask when we get to them. We're going to start with the federal issues kind of at that higher level, and then we'll move to Wisconsin. So Allison, we're going to bring you on. Allison is the Vice President of Education and Labor Advocacy at the Governmental Affairs Division of the U.S. Chamber of Commerce. She focuses on education, labor, and workforce development issues. Before joining the U.S. Chamber in 2012, she also worked on Capitol Hill and in private industry. So Allison, welcome.
Yeah, thank you very much for having me.
So let's start with some of the issues themselves. What in the federal realm, what are some of the specific measures or initiatives the U.S. Chamber is really focusing on right now in the workforce area?
Well, so it's interesting. The timing for this summit couldn't be any better. I was not expecting to be able to talk about legislation that is actually going to be in front of the House this week on workforce development issues. I think that probably is a signal of the fact that even though there's only 12 legislative days left, that workforce issues are front of mind. The National Apprenticeship Act is actually going to be on the House floor this week. So we are thinking about that very, very carefully. It's not, honestly, it's one of those bills that we don't love the way it's written. We don't hate it, but there are several amendments in there that are really concerning because they would require all federally registered apprenticeship programs to be partnered with a union organization. And right now, not all federally recognized apprenticeship programs are, I mean, it's fine if they are partnered with a union, but we are very concerned that that would become a requirement of all federally recognized programs. I don't think that this bill, even without that amendment, has any chance in the Senate right now. The Senate is going to focus on just doing nominations through the end of the year. They're not, getting the appropriations bill done and maybe some COVID relief. But I think that that's right now, that's the big focus because that's in front of us. It's in front of us. I think that the next kind of two tiers of things we're looking at is that I expect that there will be some COVID recovery measures that are going to have some strong workforce development aspects to it. I particularly look to bills that have already been introduced by Senator Daines on the Senate side, and then which his bill is the Workforce Recovery and Training Services Act, which works within the Workforce Investment and Opportunity Act, WIOA. And then there's also a bipartisan bill on the Senate, on the House side by Representatives Stefanik and Moulton, the Elevating America's Workforce Act. And I think that those two, we've seen a lot of talk about them in terms of COVID recovery. I think that'll be the focus. And then we're on to the Higher Education Reauthorization Act, because we didn't get a higher ed bill this year. I think that will be the next big focus. So.
Allison, those first two bills you mentioned, in the Senate, Senator Daines, and also the bipartisan one in the House, are those expected to possibly move as bills in and of themselves, or would they be part of a bigger package of COVID relief as you see it right now?
I think they have a larger package of COVID. I'm not sure if it's going to be COVID relief necessarily, as much as I think it might get separated out, and there might be a quicker COVID relief bill, and then it might be part of a COVID recovery type package that comes maybe with the new administration. The Senator Daines bill, some similar language was included in what the Senate initially proposed back in the summer. In the HEALS Act, they've then pared their recovery stuff, their relief stuff down, and it was eliminated from that. But I think that there's some interest in including something.
So what's the gist of what's in the bills that you first mentioned there?
Yeah, so in the House bill, it basically reestablishes the personal reemployment accounts, which had been part of a pilot program under WIOA during the Bush days. And the idea being that it would give individuals the money and the wherewithal to be able to obtain training and skills that are necessary, but it gives them the choice and the flexibility to choose their providers, whether it's online or it's in person, to decide what it is that they are going to follow in terms of what types of training they want. It also does have an incentivization to actually get reemployed, since you would get bonus money for actually being able to be hired. There's a in-demand skills component to it, and there's also a benefit if you are working with an employer in terms of getting on-the-job training at the time. So that's the personal reemployment account side of it. I think they've did it very thoughtfully, in that they looked at the pilot project and what worked well back in the early aughts when this was a pilot project, what worked well, and they looked at where there were some problems and they addressed where those problems were. And so I was excited to see that they were able to move forward bipartisanly with that one.
All right, and yeah, one of the things we heard this morning, kind of right off the bat, was we've had a lot of displacement, particularly people in hospitality and so forth. And one of the things that our first speaker this morning showed us was that actually in our community, manufacturing jobs are actually up from last year, even at this time, even with the pandemic. And so we do have employers who have challenges, and it sounds like this would be some of those kinds of tools to help people perhaps move from one industry to another.
And I think both bills, the Senator Daines bill does this too. It really does try to focus on kind of the short-term training to get people in the door, but then you can continue getting additional training, and to focus on what jobs are available in a particular area. To your point, right? You guys are seeing some job openings in manufacturing, but that doesn't mean that everybody in the country is. And so it makes sense to try to focus on what is happening in the local communities and getting help that way.
All right, I want to remind everybody too, if you have any questions, particularly if they're federal, you can enter them now, or we'll get to them later too. Just put them in the chat. So Allison, obviously the big question is the business community has been wondering, and there's been supposedly negotiations since the summer of a Phase 4 Relief Act. And I know the U.S. Chamber has been using a phrase, the cost of inaction. So bring us up to speed on where what is the U.S. Chamber seeing as priorities to help our businesses, particularly those with workforce challenges right now with COVID relief and recovery, and what is your view of the prospects at this point?
I mean, so the U.S. Chamber's priority at the moment is getting to your point, getting a COVID relief bill done. Particularly, we want to make sure that there's liability protection in there as the COVID cases keep going up and as businesses continue to be open. We want to make sure that employees and patrons and everybody are safe, and that the business owners are not going to be sued. And it's, to be honest, it's not even just business owners. The language we're looking at covers schools. It covers all employers. And so that is really our top priority in terms of having a bill that does that. Unfortunately, as far as I can tell, there has not been an awful lot of conversation at this point about what to do moving forward. I know that the Speaker's office has been talking with President-elect Biden's office about it, but at this moment, there has been a lot of inability for the transition team to get in and get information from the current administration, so that's being held up. The current administration is not really negotiating on what a COVID relief bill would look like. It sounds like Senator McConnell's still in I'm going to stay in a fairly small number in terms of what a relief bill looks like, and fairly skinny bill. And so unfortunately, there hasn't been much movement. It does seem a little bit like there's some discussion about, particularly on the House side, trying to then deal with some of the issues by putting them in the appropriations bill. The federal government runs out of money in mid-December, so there needs to be an appropriations bill that goes through. Both sides have agreed, both Democrats and Republicans and House and Senate have agreed that they want to do what they're calling an omnibus, right? So it's all 12 appropriation bills at once, as opposed to doing a continuing resolution, which would just continue funding as is. And so there is a lot of jockeying to try to get COVID money into the appropriations bills at various points, since it doesn't seem like a COVID relief bill is going to happen. Democrats are much more willing to do that at the moment than Republicans, because of the cost that could then suddenly amount to. But that seems where things are at the moment.
So would the omnibus bill likely then appropriate for the rest of the fiscal year then till next September? Is that what they're looking at? That's
what they're looking at, yes.
All right. So I think one of the things we've sensed, our chamber is also very much involved in a recovery task force in our community, where we have contact across the spectrum. And we're noticing an increasing frustration among business people that, there was a lot of celebration last spring when the CARES Act was passed, and a lot of those programs really did make a difference. And everybody said, isn't it great that they can finally come together and get something done? And then now it doesn't seem like everybody agrees that some of these specific measures are worthwhile, but yet they can't come together. What can we as people in the business community, is there anything we can do to nudge things along?
I do think it's important to keep making sure that both your House and Senate representation know how important, mentioning kind of the relief side, the other things that we've been focusing on is we want more money in the PPP program. It really did make a difference for small businesses. And I think that in some ways, there is not an understanding of how much of a difference it made. And I think the other thing and I apologize for not knowing this off the top of my head, but the other thing that we've been hearing about, right, is because of the unemployment rate increases, there is concern that UI money is going to run out, and that employers are going to end up with taxes increased to cover the cost of the shortfalls that happen in the UI trust funds. And I will say, this is one of those issues that the Republicans in particular think that the states and locals have the money, and that they just didn't use their CARES Act money efficiently, or they haven't used it at all, and that money can still be used to cover those shortfalls. Communicating how this is going to impact the business community is something that your representatives need to hear. They're hearing it from us as the U.S. Chamber, but they need to hear the individual stories at this point.
All right, thank Allison, and we may come back to you with other questions, but that's both a motivator and actually it was probably a good segue to move to some of our state issues because we're going to bring Chris Reeder on next. And Chris is the Senior Director of Workforce and Employment Policy at Wisconsin Manufacturers and Commerce, which is our state chamber here in Wisconsin. Chris has been with WMC since 2013. Previously, he also worked in the state Senate, in other government roles, and on political campaigns. So welcome, Chris.
Great, thank you, Scott. Good morning, everybody.
Why don't we go, let's look at some of the workforce issues that WMC is trying to address right now in Wisconsin, the things that you see important policy changes. And I know even the one that Allison just mentioned, the concern among businesses that their unemployment taxes will go up because of the money that has been paid out. Kind of maybe bring us up to speed on that and then kind of give us a list of the top priorities of WMC right now on the policy side of workforce.
Yeah, so certainly on the UI tax side of things, that was a major concern for employers this spring and summer. We did, as part of the law that we passed at the state level, do what we could to make sure that that liability moves to the state and not to individual employers. So hopefully, as that has worked its way through for the year, employers have been able to submit the proper paperwork to the state Department of Workforce Development to make sure that they don't see a higher rating going into the next year on their individual taxes. But certainly something to keep us abreast of, keep Representative Petrick abreast of, so we can keep working on that if we do need future, further reforms at the state level on that part. That was one area that there was agreement last year, so that's a good thing between the Republican legislature and Democratic Governor Tony Evers. When it comes to workforce generally and what we'll be pushing for and what we're putting together for our legislative agenda right now for the next legislative session that begins in January, it sounds a little silly saying it, but it's really not that different than what it was prior to the pandemic. And what I mean by that is, yeah, we got into a time this year when there was huge unemployment, but even during that time, and especially now when the unemployment has kind of come back to, not yet where it was pre-pandemic, but certainly much better than it was in the summer. During the heat of that, and again now, we get calls every day from members, usually a couple a day, call me asking, hey, I have these skilled positions that I still can't find people for. Where can I go? What assistance is there to try to find the workforce that I need? The same calls that we were getting prior to all this. So that's really the workforce issue, is really still trying to get people into the workforce here in the state. So what we need going into the next session, and if there is any work that the legislature does yet before the end of the year in a special session, we need to focus on how to get people that are unemployed yet the right training that they need to get into the jobs that all of your members and our members have. We need to take a real strong look at talent attraction. Under Governor Walker, such a campaign was started in 2018 with about $8 million to try to draw people into our state. That kind of fell apart in the last budget. Right now, as we see stories every other day of the mass exodus of individuals from some of the major population centers in the country looking for not necessarily rural farm America, but they're looking for just smaller America. Wisconsin needs to get in front of that. We need to be out there with some sort of a joint effort to draw people into our state, particularly those that are now able to work remotely. If you don't need to be tied to a large metro area, and you can come to Eau Claire, or you can come to a suburb of Madison, or you can come to Wausau or a smaller community in the state. We have a place for you here. So we need to have some sort of an effort to draw them into our state, because every day people are moving, and if we're not out there drawing them in, we're missing the boat on trying to draw that talent into our state. Something that we've tried to do for years and years, right? We've had a population exodus. We've been needing to draw people in, and now there's this giant pool of workers who are able to work remotely. They're able to come to Wisconsin if they just know our story, if they know that we have great places to live, great education. We'll keep working on affordable health care. But we have a great story to tell. We have great outdoor activities for them if they want to come here. So we need to get out in front of that. Specific to kind of how COVID impacts workforce and what we might see in the coming weeks. And Scott, I think you'll get into this a little bit with some of the Q&A with myself and others on the debate taking place in Madison right now between Governor Evers and the legislature. We would just really ask that lawmakers take a kind of a first do no harm approach when considering what they might come in and pass at the state level. And what we mean by that is, Allison mentioned or legal liability reform. We desperately need that at the state level as well and at the federal level. As she said, for employers, for schools, for higher education. These are entities that are following the rules. They're following what the CDC and what the state level guidance is. They're doing their best to keep workers safe. They should not be subject to massive lawsuits. So that needs to be first and foremost part of any COVID relief package that comes forward at the federal or state level. We can't just destroy business with lawsuits. Again, especially those that are doing everything they can to follow the rules right now. When you get into the specific bills that are being debated or bill that's being debated, one of the proposals from Governor Evers would dramatically bring workers' compensation into the fold by allowing every critical worker, and critical worker under his bill would be defined by his health department. So it doesn't just say police and fire and health workers, but it's every critical worker that they define as critical would be able to be covered by a workers' compensation policy. That would be extremely expensive for employers now and going forward. And frankly, with the community spread as it is, it's really, it's not something you can say happened at work. You don't know where somebody is picking up COVID-19 these days. So to put all of that liability on the cost of workers' comp insurance would be a really expensive proposition. And then getting into unemployment insurance, we were disappointed that the governor's proposal didn't have anything in it to fix the backlog for unemployment insurance. We're the worst in the country on that. If you're going to get people who are right now so demoralized because they haven't received a paycheck or an unemployment check from the state since March, if you want to get them encouraged to get back out there and seek work and to build up their morale, we need to fix that system and get those tens of thousands of people the money that they've been missing since the beginning of this pandemic. Then we have to look at what makes sense for unemployment insurance going forward. When this first started, we agreed and everyone kind of agreed that it made sense to waive work search requirements and to waive the 1 week waiting period and things like that. 8 months into this though, the governor is proposing right now to extend waiving work search through the entire next year, to the end of 2021. And I guess we have to really ask, does that make sense at this point when we have jobs available? We're 8 months into this. Does it really make sense to not require people to search for work going forward into the new year? Again, 8 or 9 months into this pandemic when there are jobs available. So we really need to have lawmakers just take a good look at what makes sense now going forward and not just re-up the policies that we all agreed at the beginning of the pandemic made sense, but what makes sense now. So I guess I'll stop there, Scott, and turn it back to you for any questions you may have.
All right, and I do want to remind people to put your questions in the chat, and we will come back to you, Chris, in a few minutes. I think we want to hear from Jim and Warren, and then we'll kind of have a state discussion. And certainly Allison can jump in too if you have answers from the federal side or want to know things about us. But we have talked about, I think everybody's talked already about the need for talent attraction and to try to move forward on that. One thing I'll just kind of wet your whistle a little bit too, at 12:30 we will have Missy Hughes on from WEDC, the CEO there, to talk about that. And then before the end of our program today, we actually will be revealing a couple new programs the U.S. Chamber and others in our community have been championing on the talent attraction side, including celebrating winter in Wisconsin and some things we can do to help people as they come to our community. So be sure to tune into our closing session today to learn about all of that. We're going to move to James Wood right now. Jim is chairman of the Wood Communications Group. He serves as strategic counsel to Competitive Wisconsin, which is a political consortium that works on Wisconsin's competitiveness. The Competitive Wisconsin has been the force behind some of the Be Bold economic development initiatives we've heard in recent years. Jim's career over 40 years spans both private and public sector work. He also served in Governor Patrick Lucey's administration and in the Department of Administration in the state of Wisconsin. Jim is actually going to talk about a specific talent initiative. So as we're talking about that, Jim, tell us what you're working on these days.
Well, thanks, Scott, and hello to everybody. You heard from Ted Abernathy this morning and on other occasions, and WMC's done a good job of underscoring some of the urgency that we're grappling with. I want to put a sharper point on it. What Competitive Wisconsin is working on is the idea that attraction is simply not sufficient. There's lots and lots of good work going on. We applaud all of that work. We applaud the reputation management, the idea that we should be speaking highly of Wisconsin. But the bottom line is, depending upon whose numbers you're talking about, we are somewhere short of 100 to 120,000 workers in this state that we need, okay? At least 50 to 60,000 of those people are what we would describe as high, or what the Department of Workforce Development has described as high demand workers. So they're nurses, they're software engineers, they're advanced welders, they're truck drivers, they're people who are in demand and who by the DWD's definition have a per capita income which is higher than the state's average. So that's the definition going in. Our position has been, or is at the moment, that what we need to recognize is that when we don't fill those jobs, we don't get the taxes, we don't get the additional profit for companies, you don't get the growth you need. There is a downside to not filling a job. And when all of those things don't happen, your schools go to hell in a handbasket, your roads can't be paid for, you can't deal with all sorts of public service issues. So this is something where everybody's future is kind of on the line. We got into this and took a look at it and said, we specialize in structural and systemic analysis. And we said, well, the only way to fix this is you've got to deal with your population shortage. And your population shortage says that if you look at the demographics in our workforce, our biggest need is in the 25 to 45 year age bracket. That group is actually going down, or has been going down in the state of Wisconsin. Our feeder line, which is the 18 and below, is flat, and our elderly line, or older worker line, has been going up. So your workforce is shrinking, your tax base is shrinking, and the pressure on filling those jobs is greater. We are not the only people in the country dealing with this, and COVID has made it worse for everybody, okay? You can debate about who got laid off, and you can talk about whether there are really masses of workers who are prepared to move or not. But the bottom line is everybody is competing for high demand workers. And the question is, what are we doing to compete for those workers? So the first issue that I'll talk to you very quickly about is the concept of incentives. I mean, there's all sorts of stuff going on all over the country. Everything from Vermont giving you 10 grand to move to the state. Ohio will help you get a lower mortgage interest, and they'll help you even with the down payment on the house if you agree once you graduate from an Ohio college to stay in Ohio and work for 5 years. So all of those examples all over the place. The challenge with that is, okay, so what are we up against in terms of incentives? The incentives fall into situational priorities. So it's debt management, it is housing, it's child care and child development, and a variety of different kinds of quality of life things related to communities. Wisconsin is in a unique and powerful position because we have 16 to 17 markets, all with very mature educational stuff, all with cities or communities large enough to be attractive, if you will. The real challenge comes here. So we know we need them. We know kind of what the attraction is and what the competition is putting on the table. The question is, how the heck do you pay for it, okay? And that became the focal point for us. We said, look, and in this case, we partnered with Deloitte to do the research and to do the modeling for us. We said, well, if you're not filling a job, but the job is there, it's like oil in the ground, or it's like a fallow field. How do you turn it around and turn it into something productive? The answer is you fill the damn job, right? Who's in charge of that job? It's the employer. So you need to find a sustainable revenue stream that the employer can access easily in the recruitment process. And so I want people to stop talking about attracting talent and start talking about recruiting and retaining talent, okay? Recruitment is something you have to get your hands on. It's not about creating a magnet. So we asked Deloitte to go out, and we picked 3 specific job categories. We picked a registered nurse, we picked an advanced welder, and we picked a software engineer. And the first question we asked them was, how much new public revenue will each one of those jobs generate annually? Okay? So they went out and they looked in all 3 categories, and I'll show you an example of this in just a second. That came back and we said, all right, well, that's significant from our vantage point. What about the private sector? What does filling that job do for the private sector? We looked at 2 categories, looked at additional income and profit for the company and reduced costs in terms of recruitment and training. Right? And we came up with a number and we said, okay, so we can identify these revenue streams. What do we think it's going to take to really put Wisconsin on the map and be competitive in terms of being able to let employers say, we got a deal for you here in Wisconsin, you can't really match anyplace else, and keep it sustainable? And the number was $20,000 amortized over a 5-year period of time that you could, as a potential employee, allocate to housing or to childcare or to whatever the other words are, debt management, so that you can kind of customize your own package. We said 20 grand, okay, so let's be fair. Let's say 10 of that ought to come from the new public revenues generated and 10 ought to come from the new private revenues generated. And then the question is, well, is that a good investment? Is there enough money left over? So if you could, Scott, if you could throw up that one slide for me, that would be helpful. So here you're looking at the registered nurse, okay? So the projected annual new public revenues per job. This is a nurse who goes in at 57,000 plus annually, okay? In terms of direct, indirect, and induced new public revenues, just about 9 grand. On the private side, it's about $31,000. That's an annual number, okay? So then we said, well, how many openings are there for nurses in the state of Wisconsin? We went to DWD numbers, and as all of you know, they put the number, the demand, into 3 categories. There's new growth, there is what they call transfers, which is essentially churn inside the industry in the area, and they have exits. We dropped the transfers out. So we're just looking at this number of 2,000 at new growth and exits, okay? We took a look at all the revenues per job filled, $40,000 per nurse times 2,000, okay? So if you take that and then you take it times the 5-year period of time, you're looking at $80,208,000 in terms of projected annual all revenues, okay? And then the question was, well, what does that do? So if you could do that, go to the next slide. Okay, now you take projected annual all new revenues. If the 2,000 jobs stay filled for the 5 years, now you got $401 million. And you take 20 grand times each one of those 2,000 nurses and your cost is $40 million. That's a net of $361 million. Even if we're off by a bunch, it at least warrants our looking at. I asked Scott to put in your chat boxes a link to a 4.5-minute video, which moves a little quickly, but don't forget you can pause it by hitting your space bar. But it covers all of this, because then the last question is, how do you make this work? And the answer is, it has to work locally and dynamically, but you need a quality control factor. So that's what we've tried to put together, and I won't chew up all of the time here, giving you more detail than you need. But so our bottom line is this. We see this as an urgent phenomenon. Every day we are not moving on this, we are losing. It's just that simple. The second thing we think is that this doesn't need massive new infrastructure. We think the infrastructure is out there with the chambers, with the economic development regions, with all of the folks who are already working on this. This is about empowering those folks, okay? And we think that there are clearly revenue streams there. So we're in the process of trying to have that conversation with more and more people. And we look forward to, and I will go anywhere virtually and talk with any group. So if your group would like to drill down on this, I'd be happy to show up. Let me stop there, Scott.
All right, thanks, Jim. And you reminded me that, you know, we use the term, I would go virtually anywhere, and it's taken on a new meaning, hasn't it? So I did put the link in the chat to the video that Jim talked about. And if you have any questions for him or for anybody, again, I'll remind you to pop them in the chat, and we'll try to ask them as we go along. We're going to go next to Representative Warren Petrick. Warren chairs the Wisconsin State Assembly's Workforce Committee. He lives near Oliva and is one of our local legislators representing District 93. He was first elected to the legislature in 2010. So Warren, I think that means your reelection means you're going to be starting your 6th term. Is that right?
Yes, that's absolutely right. Yes,
well, let's go to you. You chaired the Workforce Committee in the last session. Hopefully that will be something that'll be continuing. And the Assembly and the legislature have taken on a number of initiatives over the years to deal with workforce issues. So as you move to the next session, or even perhaps whether there's going to be a lame duck session coming up, what are the issues based on not only what you've heard today, but you're hearing from employers and your knowledge of the needs in state government? What is your perspective right now on the key issues you're going to be working on?
well, thank you, Scott, for the opportunity to be here today, and with a really distinguished group of folks that are well versed with workforce challenges. And of course, this is something that going forward will continue to be a high priority for me personally as an elected official, and certainly the legislature, certainly the governor's office, all of us are looking at this as probably the number 1 or number 2 priority, as Mr. Abernathy pointed out. So I just, first of all, want to thank the chambers, and I want to thank WMC, local economic development groups, for being in communication with me, letting me know where our challenges are, where our opportunities are. And thank you, Mr. Wood, you really underlined one of my mantras since I took this chair, and that is my 3-legged stool that I always point out, which has been used in other contexts, but certainly attraction, retention, and training. I think those 3 are the continued focus of my group, my committee. I have a great working group of bipartisan legislators that have taken on any number of initiatives, and of course, we will continue our focus to try to put matching people that are investors with the people that they need and want going forward. So I'll continue to collaborate and work with our partners, and certainly having WMC there as our state chamber is a wonderful partnership. WEDC, I've worked with them very closely over the years. Our Wisconsin Hospitals Association, there are so many great people on our team that want us to succeed. And we want everybody to reach their dreams and reach the highest potential of their talents. Yesterday, I had the privilege of sitting again. Since it was formed, I've been a member of the Governor's Council on Workforce Investment. We had a great meeting, and some of the highlights, in case your members weren't there, but Governor Thompson spoke of the UW system's transformation. I mean, he's really on board to seek innovation within the system, keep them pertinent, keep them on the cutting edge of training our workers. And of course, we all know the economic impact of our universities, and I will continue to be one of their greatest supporters. Our UW Tech colleges, Maureen Foy was there, and she underlined their commitment to the success of things that are working for our workforce. And right now, those are things like the Career Pathways program, which has been highly successful. Their online delivery of teaching. Within 3 days, they went from teaching face-to-face to going online and doing it very successfully with hands-on training, which is really a challenge. The apprenticeship programs in our state are second to none. We probably lead the nation in the ability to get people to work and getting paid while they're trained. It's a fantastic program, and I've been a huge fan and will continue to advocate strongly. And of course, the technical colleges are great partners with local businesses, and the chamber is a part of that. And thank you, Scott, for your coordination of those efforts. But certainly they can listen, they're nimble, they can they can say, where's the need? How do we address it? How do we train those people? So we've got great, great partners in Wisconsin. I'm so optimistic for the future. That being said, we're going to have huge challenges. And of course, COVID, the number one thing on people's mind, you can't get away from it. It is an unfortunate situation since last March. And since the state was shut down for a while, it has seen tremendous recovery. A lot of that is due to the fact that our people are so strong and so focused and want to succeed. Employers have done all they can to keep people on jobs, but there is still going to be a workforce shortage. That has not gone away. It is going to probably become more and more of a focus as we go forward. Encouraging other talent to come here, as Mr. Wood said, is so huge. And can we incentivize those folks? Can we come up with programs that within our limited ability to pay for them at the state? And I'll get to that later. It's great to have the federal folks here. So I really appreciate Allison's comments, but we're going to need a lot of federal help. That was underlined by the governor in his comments yesterday, and all of us realized that the state can't print money. And so many of the challenges that we have are not going to go away without large investments on the part of the federal government, and specifically broadband. And when we talk about that, nobody's brought it up yet at this point, but in my rural area, it's one of the number one concerns of people going forward. And how do they become better workers? How do they get the training that they need? Why would they locate their business in Ellsworth if they can't get high quality broadband, for example? That, if taken up by the federal government as a high priority, as it was in the 1930s with electrification, I think that the parallel is there. And I think that much needs to be done in order to get that into our rural areas. Telecommuting is changing everything. As Mr. Abernathy pointed out this morning, it's here to stay. It's going to transform how we do business. Look at us. Here we are in diverse parts of the nation at this second, sharing information, which is fantastic. And many people are embracing it. Takes an old guy like me a little bit longer to really get underneath it, but I'm learning quickly. There are many people, unfortunately, still on unemployment insurance in our state and across the nation. It was hinted at by Allison earlier that where is that money going to come from? Well, in Wisconsin, we've been very, very fortunate. We had a good source to go to, but there was a bottleneck, and that's unfortunate. I won't go into the details of that, but we need to step up. And that's one part of our conversation going forward, is how do we address unemployment insurance in a responsible way so that people don't have to wait. When no fault of their own, they lose their job. It was so unfortunate, and we've got hundreds of calls. We're dealing still with clients that haven't gotten responses from that. That was on the unfortunate side, but I think one part of our focus going forward will be to transform the UI system if this ever happens again, and let's hope it never does. But we're going to have continuing challenges, of course, going forward. But aligning workforce programs into the future, there are so many great employment programs in the public and the private sectors. So dozens of agencies to deal with, and we'll have a legislative council study committee report on that very soon. I'm anxious to see the results of that. We have to work to solve our workforce housing shortage. And cut me off if I'm getting too long, but I could talk for a long time. I'm batting cleanup, as it was put. So I'm hoping to dovetail off of many of the comments that have been made. Again, a federal response to broadband expansion. Certainly, I'm very proud that we were able to get $45 million in leveraging grants to states, but that doesn't go very far in rural areas. It's a very tough. I had 2 constituent calls this morning just in my district that are dealing with broadband problems. And so hopefully on the future will be things like the Skylink program that Mr. Musk is working on. Perhaps that will be the future and cable will suddenly become obsolete. I don't know, but we're going to have to be embracing those technologies going forward. The state budget, and I'm sure everyone's wondering, we don't know. It's the biggest unknown at this point in time. It will be challenging. Certainly, every budget is challenging. But that being said, we can't print money as the federal government can. So we're dependent on the income that comes from state taxes to us. on a very positive note, Wisconsin is in better financial shape than most states. And that I really truly believe is due to the last decade of hard, prudent work on the part of the legislature, the joint finance team, the former governor, and even this governor who signed our budget in the last go around. So I'm optimistic that we're in a good shape. We're not in flourishing shape, but certainly we did create a good business climate. What people want is security of policy going forward, and I will do everything I can to recreate that where we need to. And I certainly need to talk to many folks as we go on, and I know that all of you on the screen will be talking with me. We did pass AB 185 in April, which brought $2 billion in leveraging federal money to the state, and many, many other things. And going forward, I'm sure you wanted to ask me specifically about what is going on right now. The governor came out with his bill before we could talk, which I always encourage all of us to sit down at the table. Let's look at legislation from a standpoint of what is possible. I really, truly believe always as a policymaker that we find higher ground by finding our common ground. So where are the common points? There are going to be many. I really am optimistic that we're going to sit down. We will come up with something. I don't know if it'll be passed before the end of the year, but that will include Medicaid-related things in nursing homes, swing beds, outpatient, continuing the dashboard with WHA, for example, which gives us great data day-to-day, rapid testing increases, contact tracing increases, certainly WEDC grants for hospitality industry and maybe others, PPI changes, UI changes, and fix that backlog, limited liability provisions, which Mr. Reeder pointed out. I signed on to a bill that might become part of that package, perhaps broadband infrastructure, on and on. So we could be passing an omnibus bill maybe in the near future, but we're going to see where the feds sit down with us and can provide some good relief when it comes to COVID. So that's enough for now. I'll just stop. I can talk for a long, long time, as many of us can, but thank you very much for the opportunity.
Representative Petrik, I might just ask you one, well, it's maybe, hopefully it's not too long an answer, but you mentioned the three-legged stool of things that you concentrate on. Which, what are some specifics within that you would see coming before your committee or that need to be accomplished through legislation, either if there is a lame duck or in the new session in the new year?
Well, it's a good question, and certainly we don't have any bills before us right now that will be heard. I would guess that attraction will be part of it. Hopefully, we will provide some incentives there. I know we've talked about many different ideas on both sides of the aisle of how we can continue to be the destination for people. But as far as specifics, I don't know how much workforce specific will be in an omnibus bill if we bring that forward. It was interesting to see that. Even though we're talking specific ideas in a broad sense, we haven't detailed out those. I gave you quite a bit of detail and many things. It was interesting to hear that the Senate sees no need to come in right now. So many of these things, of course, will be dependent on how much finances we have. And at this point, we haven't gotten the Fiscal Bureau's numbers. So that all being said, we're going to listen to all of our partners as they come in and talk to us about workforce needs, and certainly the chambers will be a big portion of who I listen to going forward.
All right, thanks. Chris, I might go to you and ask you to put sort of your outside of government, put maybe your analyst hat on, and tell us what your best guess is today as to where we're going to go between the governor and the legislature in terms of anything moving forward at this point. Are we going to see some action, or is it going to be like we're seeing in the federal government where they talk and nothing happens?
Yeah, it seems like we will see some action, whether that, as Representative Petrik said, happens yet this year or is early, the first couple of weeks of January is one question outstanding, and the other question is, will that action be frankly significant or not? There are a lot of little things that meaningful, yes, but not a game changer that I think the two sides can come together and agree on rather quickly. Unfortunately, probably some of the bigger items, attraction or recruitment, those type of things probably get pushed into the next budget debate, which means not until, early or late spring, early summer. But I think we will see some action. Certainly some of the things that need to have action on, unemployment insurance issues, because all of that expires at the end of the year. So we need to, if any of that will be reformed or continued as is, that needs to happen soon, or at least very early into the new year. So there will be public pressure to do something. Just how big it is what's probably the unknown.
Chris, both you and Allison, as well as Representative Petrick, talked about the need for liability protection for good actors. And maybe both of you, Allison, maybe I'll go to you because we haven't asked you a question for a little while, but I know that has been an absolute top priority of the U.S. Chamber. We've heard from the Senate that they're amenable to that, they're actually on board with that. We had a Representative Ron Kind, our local congressman, on, who's on Ways and Means, but is considered a moderate in the House, tell us that he thought it made sense. But are you getting any sense that we will see that on the federal level, or where is the House going to be on that?
It's not as much of a priority for the House, and it hasn't been a priority for the Speaker at all. And to be honest, it wasn't a priority for the current administration, which I think has also made it a difficult task to move forward. One of the things about the COVID packages is, even if we don't have one, even if the federal government doesn't have one before the end of the year, the president-elect has made it clear that he wants to see something. So there will be conversations pretty early on with his transition team about why there needs to be some liability protection included in whatever comes forward. And we've had a good working relationship with him previously, and so hopefully that is something that can be carried forward. I think it is one of the main issues that could get the Senate get the Senate to move a bill. So I think that's, once we see something, it will include liability protection. I think, to Chris's point, it just remains to be seen what that actually looks like.
So after the election, the U.S. Chamber issued a couple statements that expressed a lot of optimism about the government going into the new year, with a lot of the people that the Chamber supported in the election, pro-business people, did well. Is that optimism holding? What do you see as going into the new year with some of the Chamber's priorities?
I think the optimism is holding. I think, to be honest, I think the issues that we're talking about are a perfect example of a way that people can quickly work across the aisle and can quickly work together to find a good path forward. I think there are other issues. I mean, we haven't talked about some of these other larger issues, but infrastructure, when you're talking about issues around broadband, the broadband issues are definitely ones that are recognized on both sides of the aisle. Exactly how to deal with them is not necessarily agreed on, but I think once we've taken the election politics out of it, which will happen now that we've moved past election day, once we get into this new Congress and into the new administration, I think everybody is actually really willing to roll up their sleeves. I'll just add a very quick anecdotal note. Even towards the end of this election cycle, the House passed the Pregnant Workers Fairness Act, which gives employers clarity on how they're supposed to accommodate pregnant workers, since there's not a lot of clarity on what's expected now. And all I just kept hearing from staff was, thank you for bringing us something that is bipartisan. Thank you for bringing us something that has been negotiated and worked on. Because basically the U.S. Chamber worked with the women's advocacy groups, and we figured out a common sense path forward. And we ended up with over 100 Republicans supporting what was initially a fairly partisan bill, because we were able to make some, in the grand scheme, fairly minor changes that accommodated everybody. I think that people are hungry for that, both on a staff level and on a member level. So I'm excited about the new Congress.
Chris and Warren, we might have you address a little bit. What do you see as the change in, if everybody doesn't know, there's a change in leadership in the state Senate, because Senator Fitzgerald was elected to Congress, and so he moves on, and we have a new leader. There's been, I guess the analysis says the Senate's moving a little bit to the right. But both in terms of maybe a comment on the new leadership in the Senate from what you know about it, and I would presume that a liability protection move would not be a significant budget issue. It's just something to help the business community out. So what is your view of whether the state can pass liability protection? Maybe Chris and then Warren, if you want to address that.
Sure. Yeah, and I think first to the point of the new leadership in the Senate, I really don't think you'll see much difference from Devin from Senator LeMahieu and what we saw from Senator Fitzgerald. They have similar styles. From our perspective, they've both been great champions of employer issues. So I think he'll do a great job, and I don't think stylistically you'll see much of a difference in terms of what he brings forward and where he helps direct the caucus to go. To the point of the caucus being a little more to the right, yeah, depending on what issues you're talking about, I guess. When you're talking about employment issues and workforce issues, I'd say it's pretty much the same as where it was. I don't think we've maybe moved. The caucus is in a good place, I'll say, when it comes to employer-focused issues. In terms of getting liability reform done, I think the important thing to remember, and especially when we talk about it, is that it's not just for employers. It's also schools, and it's supported by several school board association groups from all over the state. It's higher education. Those entities need the relief and the protection from frivolous lawsuits just as much as any of our manufacturing members or retail members or grocery stores might need. So it's really a broad coalition of different groups that kind of are from the political spectrum. So we're hopeful that breadth of need and us talking in conjunction, jointly with schools, asking the legislature and the governor to enact it, and hopefully it'll be part of the package that comes forward that will have a lot of other good stuff in it as well that both sides want. So we're hopeful that it can get done. That said, it's facing facing pretty high opposition from groups that you would expect from labor unions, from trial attorneys, folks that are putting up a pretty big fight that for whatever, they don't mind seeing frivolous lawsuits, even if they might bankrupt and decimate our economy even more. So it has strong opposition from those groups, but I think we can probably get it done next year.
Warren, your outlook on liability, and maybe clue us in a little bit too, is as we move into the new year, what is the counterpart committee in the Senate that you work with, and who is the chair there?
Okay, yes, thank you. I just wanted to do a high-level check-in on that, and 94%, I believe, in excess of 94% of what we passed last session was bipartisan. So I think that the partisanship that is viewed in the media and Washington is somewhat overplayed in our state situation. I look for solutions. I'm not a politician, certainly by trade, but I try to sit down with everyone and listen to the ideas on both sides of the aisle. And Mr. Reeder knows that when I ask a lobbyist to come in and explain their side, I always ask, what is the opposite side of this coin? I want to hear all of the arguments for and against, and certainly he points out some of the challenges going forward. My cohort has been Senator Jacques from the Green Bay area in workforce development, and I have no idea who will be named. I do have a pretty good indication that I will be chair in this term in the assembly. Whoever it is over there, I work closely with them to try to get things done for not only the business community, but what is right for every citizen here. And I certainly believe that those that take the risk and invest in our state should be rewarded for that risk. But Mr. Reeder also points out one of the challenges. Can we get the governor to sign any sort of meaningful legislation when it comes to limiting liability? We've done it in the past, but under a different executive branch. But certainly I signed on as a co-author, as I said, of Senator Kappinga's legislation, which didn't get hearings and it was late in the go round. Whether that in its essence will go forward into an omnibus bill or a separate bill that we take forward, I will, if it protects nonprofits and protects our schools and our universities, as Mr. Reeder pointed out, I'll probably be an advocate for it once again, certainly. But we will have our challenges, as always. I mean, no matter who's in those leadership positions, I'm very happy that we have a Western Wisconsin senator that was just one of my colleagues in former, well, he's still Representative Staff Schultz from our Western Wisconsin area. And Senator Bernier, right from our area, is also on leadership team over in the Senate. So I'm hoping that communication is wide open and we can get some really positive things done in this next term.
All right, we're going to wrap up now, but maybe we'll do kind of a lightning round to give each individual a chance to make one more comment. Jim, I might start with you, and in a second, I'm going to ask you maybe to tell us what the path forward is on your proposal, and then I'm going to go to Alice and Chris and Warren and just say, what is one thing you kind of want to leave with us as something to be watching going forward? So, Jim?
The thing I would want to underscore, given Representative Pittrick's and others' concerns about lack of financing as we go forward in the next year, which I recognize, is that the proposal we're talking about, this concept of sustainable funding is the critical piece for us. And that sustainable means it's funded based on the activity that you're engaged in. So we're not talking about creating jobs, we're talking about filling jobs. And it's our position that you can put that investment out there that we talked about, and that it will generate money for the state as opposed to requiring money for the state. Our numbers say that you don't need to raise taxes or expand taxes. You just need to authorize some bits and pieces to allow this to start moving forward. And I'm happy to talk about the bits and pieces, but that's another 2-hour program. So I'll stop there.
All right, thank you. Allison, one thing we should be watching as we go into the new year.
I think that beyond the COVID issues, looking at Higher Education Act reauthorization, looking at things like short-term Pell for the short-term programs, or the College Transparency Act, so that there's more transparency in the data about what happens once you go to a program. Those things are really important. What I will say is that while this group obviously is very interested in the workforce issues and recognizes the importance of being involved and making your voice heard on these issues, they are often the issues that, from the U.S. Chamber's perspective, I hear about as, the attracting talent problem as a problem, the recruitment as a problem, filling jobs as a problem, but it is not something that often gets prioritized in the federal by the federal government in terms of legislation. So just staying on top of that and making sure that your members are hearing about the importance of reauthorizing these bills and paying attention to the workforce issues, I think is really important.
All right, Chris?
Yeah, so I guess for my wrap up, I'm gonna go to a soapbox a little bit. You probably don't need to hear it, but please, please, please do everything you can to do your part to slow the spread. We're part of a coalition with the Hospitals Association, with the grocers, the restaurants, dozens of other associations, chambers of commerces from all over the state, really encouraging employers, and most are doing an awesome job, but do everything you can in the workplace to, keep your workers safe, distanced, remote if possible. None of this matters if we can't get the spread under control. Unfortunately, Wisconsin is still a hotbed. My hometown, Beaver Dam, Wisconsin, is somehow the worst in the state and one of the top 5 in the country. We need everyone to keep doing our part to try to get this under control. Vaccines will be part of that, but that's not for several months. So, let's just keep working at it and slow this thing down so that all this other stuff we can get to and will make a difference next year.
All right, Warren, any final comments?
Yes, thank you very much. And I'd like to echo Mr. Wood's presentation also, and thank you, very succinct. But return on investment is something that all of us as business people look at. And if we can make prudent investments into attracting people to our state, I'm certainly up for that. And you and I can have those conversations. Some of the things that I know will be a priority for me going forward will be the new science building at UWEC, continuing the funding for that. That's a huge workforce issue. And right now we're facing a crisis because of COVID that, of course, no one saw a pandemic coming, but there's been a nursing shortage for decades that nobody really seemed to address it in a meaningful way. So I'm optimistic that we can get some more training for nurses and Eau Claire, my alma mater, hopefully will become the spot for pre-med students going into the future. So I'm excited about that. I'll be making more investments and pushing for Wisconsin Technical College system, who of course are key to training our workforce, developing new ways and ways to approach that. Our K-12 schools are #1 budget priority. It always has been. It probably always will be. That's the way it should be. We need folks, as Mr. Abernathy said this morning. I mean, it starts with those key skills, and from there that they learn at home, that they learn in school. But we need to keep our schools strong and figure out ways to move our Wisconsin rural schools especially forward. Any responses we have for COVID should align to workforce. I really believe that we can keep that focus moving forward. We should put more resources into workforce development. I will certainly advocate for that. We need to ensure employers that they have the tools that they need to hire people and make sure that we maintain a good business environment that will help them grow, not increasing regulation, not increasing taxes, and looking at that liability, which is very, very important. Licensing reform that we attached to AB 185, maybe some of that can become permanent. And I look at those regulations on a line-by-line basis. And certainly I'm a big advocate for youth apprenticeships, and we'll try to keep those as strong, grow those programs as much as possible, and get people to work. Thank you.
Well, thanks very much. We really appreciate our panel being with us today. You got some time to grab some quick lunch, and our next session starts at 12:30. Back to you, Aaron.